It is my great pleasure to be the introducer of our next speaker. Anne Roiphe is a celebrated essayist, a journalist, a commentator on Jewish issues. She's the author of Loving Kindness, Generation Without Memory, A Jewish Journey Through Christian America, and Season for Healing, Reflections on the Holocaust. Ms. Roiphe is also a columnist for the New York Observer and a contributing editor to the Jerusalem Report. In addition, she is a contributor to 2 books of essays, Congregation and Testimony. She's married to Dr. Herman Roiphe, a psychoanalyst, and has 3 daughters and 2 stepdaughters. If you will indulge me, I have a personal reflection. Ms. Roiphe wrote a piece in the New York Times on December 21st, 1979, called Christmas Comes to a Jewish Home. Hoo-ha. I mean, it caused such a to-do, she had to write a book. And her book was Generation Without Memory, a subtitled A Jewish Journey in Christian America. I read the book when it came out, and I must tell you that I felt as if Anne Roiphe had written me a letter. This book spoke to every doubt, every concern, everything Jewish about me. It was just extraordinary. I met her yesterday for the first time, and a great pleasure it was, but I felt as if we were picking up a friendship that we had had since 1981 when I read her letter to me. And just as an indication of her prescience and her anticipation of this colloquium, let me briefly read to you her Fir Kasha from the beginning of her book. Do I think God is there? If I accept him, how does he answer for his crimes? There is a collective destiny, a historical experience that is Judaism, but I, you, we, they do or do not choose to be a part of it. Does anyone have a choice, is her third question. Will Jewishness, Yiddishkeit, Jewish culture be permitted to disappear? I've lost her fourth question somewhere in this. Here it is. If one leaves the tight world of one's ancestors, if one abandons the synagogue, what replacements are made in the building of the soul? Some of us here would argue that we have found an answer for your fourth question. And she asks a fifth question because if she's going to write a non-traditional book, she might as well break tradition, and asks in general about the role of the woman in the traditional picture of Judaism. This is an extraordinary work. Her other works are similarly outstanding, and it is with great pleasure that I bring to you Ms. Anne Roiphe.
Thank you very much. It's a little alarming to me to realize how many years I've been thinking about the same thing, and I still have no solution. But so be it. Now, last week I had visiting me from Israel a friend, a woman who is the only woman to have ever gone through the Army Air Force flight school in Israel, became a pilot, and a person who is politically very much opposed to me in many ways, but we have formed a deep and great friendship, which does, I have noticed, happened among Israelis of all different political stripes. And I told her what I was talking about, and she said, "Oh, bother," she said, "that's just land, Torah, people. That's what makes a Jewish person. You don't have to say anything more than land, Torah, people." Well, being an American, I talk on, and therefore, without the simplicity of land, Torah, people, I will examine the question. On the other hand, this Israeli answer, automatic, spontaneous, short and to the point, is really quite the answer. And I'm going to come back to it at the end of my talk. There are many sentimental ideas out there about being Jewish. They flatter us. They are products of our centuries-old pain, as well as our all-too-human, not deeply hidden sense of superiority to others. You know what I mean. God has chosen us. Most of our rabbis have a good enough sense of public relations to emphasize that this means separated out for special obligations, not chosen out among others for special benefits. History certainly supports that interpretation. Nevertheless, the word chosen hovers through the Jewish world and appears in many forms in the communal image we hold of ourselves. We are more ethical, more moral, more trustworthy than other people. We have the Talmud and the Torah, which have struggled with questions of ethics when others were swinging from trees. You heard some of that this morning. We are smarter than everyone else. We have given the world Einstein, Marx, and Freud. Our children win Westinghouse science prizes. We have made ourselves into... Are you okay? Can you hear it?
Closer.
Closer? Actually, it's too high for me. All right, is that better? Okay. We have made ourselves into university presidents, lawyers, doctors, scientists. Even in poverty, even as we worked in sweatshops as tailors and seamstresses, as hat makers and cigar rollers, we went to poetry classes, we listened to classical music, we debated socialism and God's role in human affairs. Our raw Jewish energy lifted us into the library and carried us into graduate school, guided us in commerce, and our communal organizations always took care of those who had trouble. Our philanthropy is unequaled in other communities. We are, after all, a light unto the nations. Not a theater footlight, not a flashlight, not a track light, not a single bulb with a chain attached, not a moonbeam, but a real illuminating light. Now, we believe this, and we don't believe it. We think well of ourselves. We know this is a slight exaggeration. Some people think this is the whole truth. Others of us know that it's only part of the truth. It's only one of the things about us that makes any sense at all. Our rise into America, into the middle class, is due to our superior intellectual capacities. It's a result of our being the people of the book. I like that one. We are experts at words. They, the Goyim, are peasants who grunt as they kill their pigs and knock down their friends. They chase balls. We chase reason. We are good to our women. They are drunks. We had the good sense to worship one God while the other peoples of the earth were still praying to trees and sacrificing children in bloody ceremonies. We invented circumcision, a symbolic act that contains the psychological drama without the inhumanity. Our stories are the base of Western culture. Our wait for the Messiah's first appearance is authentic. Their wait for his return trip is wishful thinking. All this inherent superiority we don't quite believe, but we do pass it on to our children, a mess of defensive porridge. And it comes as no surprise when they don't believe our version of our place in the pecking order. They really know better. They know that shiksas are beautiful, and some of them are not so dumb. The kings and the presidents are Gentiles. Homer, Virgil, and Dante, Camus and Samuel Beckett, I'm sorry, Norman Cantor, are not so bad either. Picasso and Mozart, the great cathedrals and the shrines at Angkor Wat are all right too. Nevertheless, this sense of Jewish grandeur, this aura of Jewish superiority will endure until the last Jew in the diaspora intermarries. This Jews don't play ball, they play physics position is one of our sandbags against the flood tide of American life. The river swells. I don't believe this Jewish superiority story for a moment, but I like it. I can see, too, how the Jewish galut sense of inferiority fuels our ambitions, creates our humor, tickles our motors, causes us to dislike ourselves and to turn on our women. The Jap joke saga, added to the Jewish mother saga, suffices to tell that tale. So most of us, under the rug of our rational minds, have tucked feelings of superiority and feelings of inferiority. Neither are helpful. Jewish life will not survive as long as it is predicated on the myth of our virtue and their criminality. It will no longer survive because they hate us, or because they once did, or because we harangue our children that they should be Jewish because we say so. I am looking at the issues of superiority or inferiority, not because they constitute the core of Jewish identity, they don't, but because they offer clues about where we are and how we got there. We could dismiss this sense of superiority as a byproduct of anti-Semitism. If someone hadn't insulted Norman Cantor in Winnipeg, he would not feel necessarily superior to everyone else. After all, Jews have dealt with vicious anti-Semitism since before the destruction of the Second Temple. We have always been able to count on the hostility of the outside world to wound us, to bind us together, to force us to think well of ourselves. If we hadn't, we would have long ago disappeared. We could say that our emphasis on our brains and our skills, on our ethics and our musical gifts, and on our learned and rich traditions is compensation alone for the generally despised state we have lived in. But I don't believe that would be true either. We have to go back to the beginning, at least to when Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem to build the Second Temple, and he and Ezra separated out the non-Jewish wives and sent them packing. The return signaled a time for group purity, for ethnic cleansing, if you will. No one at the time reported the grief of children sent from their fathers, of men who lost wives they had cherished. There were no cameras on the scene. The individual feelings were ignored, and only the group values mattered. The group required purity of bloodlines. The mother had to be Jewish. This was the first time I know of that intermarriage was reported as a potential calamity for the Jewish people, and it was dealt with summarily. Our liberal contemporary minds do not like to think about this. Our American individualism collides with a non-democratic tribal ferocity that is right there, bold as it can be, seen in the faces of the right-wing fundamentalist settlers in Efrat. Right at the center of the Judaism we have made our truth, sometimes racist, sometimes exclusive. We can excuse this narrowness, this search for racial purity, this cruelty to the outsider, because other tribes were behaving this way and still behave this way. And we can excuse it because the Jewish people had endured captivity, evil, and seen their sacred city burning. But we shouldn't forget it. Because Jews, too, have written terrible things in their ancient texts about strangers. How you shouldn't trust your baby to one. How the stranger may steal your goats and cheat you. There are great arguments in the Talmud about whether you can or cannot break the Sabbath law in order to save the life of a stranger. You can dig on the Sabbath if the person buried under a pile of stones is a Jew. But can you dig if he is not a Jew? Our group pride and our group loyalty, when you examine it closely, is very like everyone else's. That is to say, it is often a menace to humankind. If we go back to Nehemiah, we see that the idea that Reform Judaism tried to slip over on the rest of America won't quite wash. The idea that Jews are just a religion with a particular quaint fondness for the land of origin, of exile and return doesn't quite make sense. We are not just a religion. We are a people. We are a nation going backward in time with a communal story, with communal text, with folklore, with a calendar of events that are social, sociable, as well as rich with group meaning. The story is long, complicated, full of variation and side effects, but it is one story. When a person converts to Judaism, they adopt the story of the people, and they make themselves one with the people. They don't just leave one set of prayers for another, one set of holidays for another. However uncomfortable it makes us to say so, there is some racial matter in this identity. Now, we can use the word racial and we can say there's a piece of it that's racial without saying that one race is better than another race, my race is better than your race, my part of the race is better than your part of the race. We don't have to get involved in any of that, but we do have to acknowledge that since this story went way back and it involved one group of people, it is in that binding, in binding oneself into that story, that something special happens, something that's different from your being a native of Detroit, that's different from your being a Methodist, that's very, very special. And while it has caused us a lot of difficulty, it has also given us a great deal of pleasure. And I think as what I want to do about this question of are we a race is I want to keep it on the side. I want to keep my mind open about to what degree there may be some racial issues involved. We certainly had Tay-Sachs among Ashkenazi Jews. We had children dying. These superior children were dying sometimes because of their blood genes. We have had all kinds of signs that we are together with our ancestors in some kind of endeavor. Now, if that's how we define race, then I accept that Jews may be, to some extent, a race. I was recently a part of a Hadassah commission composed of a varied group of professional women from around the country. We were asked to address the question of the needs of American Jewish women. The agenda was not unsimilar to this weekend's. How can we make more Jews? How can we hold on to those we have? As I was listening, the sociologists were presenting the most difficult charts in the world for those of us who are somewhat math deficient. It occurred to me that we hadn't answered the first question. Why should the Jewish people continue in America? Why do we want there to be Jews? Is it just a reflex, the way a worm grows back his head if you cut it off? Or is there something that we believe that affects us, makes the Jewish identity of our children more than a sentimental goal, more than a racial reflex, and a matter of true urgency? If we are neither particularly superior nor particularly inferior, then what are we? Certainly particular. Many Jews are Jews. We have discussed this morning. We discussed this yesterday. I apologize for the repetition here. Many Jews are Jews because of the Holocaust. At the bottom of the heart, all Jews have a piece of Holocaust identity, a response to the camps that is not like their Gentile neighbors. It has to do with threat to the bone. It has to do with catastrophe in the family. It has to do with awe before the escape that was made by relatives, parents, by immigration quotas. Even my children and grandchildren would not have lived had not my grandparents left on a boat escaping other pogroms. It has to do with our moral outrage, our empathy, our particular relationship to the dead. There has been much talk about Holocaust identity and how it has been over-milked. The dependence of Jewish identity on the lachrymose Jewish history has been decried. Decry it all you like. It is a reality. And Jewish organizations know it. At least their fundraisers know it. And try to escape it all you might. Every Jewish child is pledged to the group, in part by the Holocaust. And when many of them leave the group, forget they are Jewish, the Holocaust stays with them, a shadow of reproach on their suburban lives, their marriages into the Mall of America. Disaster identity, for better or worse, never again to anyone, or even just never again to me, is part of all Jews, whether we would wish it so or we would not. The other leg of Jewish identity is this. Visit your airport in June and you will see it in action. Legions of American Jewish youth sent to Israel for a touch of reality of history, the holiness of place, the miracle of rebirth, the drip irrigation of tomatoes, the end, finally, of the galut. They return, probably not convinced that their personal destiny lies there, but they are attached to the land. At least on return, they own a piece of turquoise jewelry and a Hebrew language T-shirt. That is where we came from. That is a place to be proud of. At least that's the plan of the youth organizers. Israel, the state of the Jews. Zion, the land of historical dream, and now the home of the sweetest orange, the nastiest terrorists, the angriest settlers, the only place in the world where if you leave your pocketbook on the bus, the army comes to blow it up. No doubt, Israel is a corner of Jewish identity. Of course, most American Jews do not visit Israel. They are not Zionists. They are Orioles fans. They have IRAs and big plans to go to Cancun over the Christmas break. They are busy with the trajectories of their lives, which have little to do with a country far away that is always in some kind of trouble. Nevertheless, passionate as it has become, Israel, the land, is a piece of Jewish identity. Remember Entebbe. Remember how we all felt. Even today, when Israel is not so much a knight in shining armor as a tarnished war hero having some kind of nervous breakdown requiring hospitalizations, most American Jews who would admit to being Jews admit to a concern for Israel. It's family, after all. Who else will take us in if? This affection for Israel is also, at bottom, Holocaust-related. Go fight it. All right, the other leg, Torah. One's particular religious affiliation or lack of it is the other part of Jewish identity. And for those affiliated, it is probably the major part. For the skeptics and the atheists among us, for the universalists and the existentialists, and the vast number of us for whom doubt about God has been reinforced by the Holocaust, it is a place where Jewish identity can slip away, allowing a thinner and thinner Judaism. Yiddish gone, pious grandparents gone, Sabbath gone, what my daughter calls brown Jewish food gone. The sages replaced by professors are now interviewed on Bill Moyers. The rabbi's authority is gone, replaced by Joyce Brothers and Dr. Ruth and David Letterman. The culture has cracked and dissolved like the first ice of winter on the local pond. Now, before I go back to my original question about why the Jewish people should continue in America, in the world, let me tell you the story of my family's assimilation and the price that must be paid when all things Jewish are breaking off and falling away. And as I tell this story, I am aware that my personal story is not the story of the Jewish people. I'm also aware that history has a way of flowing through each of us. So if everyone in this room stood up and told their personal story, we would have a glimpse of history. The best I can do is tell my own story here. My grandfather came to America in the late 1880s as a child, and very quickly he managed to get himself a pushcart, and on that pushcart he managed to put a shirt, and then he put a few more shirts on his pushcart, and he took another brother out on the street with him, and by the time he was 21, he had a shirt company, which oddly enough was called Van Heusen Shirts. He was a non-religious Jew, no Torah, but lots and lots of Yiddishkeit, since that obviously was his first language, lots and lots of loyalty to the peoplehood. And he founded a hospital in New York, Beth Israel Hospital. And he was a member of every organization that ever existed at the time. And his family lived entirely in a Jewish world. They began to live very well. They ended up on Riverside Drive in a house. And my mother, who was the youngest of his 5 children, married a lawyer who went to work for the business, and they moved to another very nice section of New York and began to live. They joined a Jewish country club, but they didn't speak Yiddish. They didn't go to temple. They didn't go to synagogue. My mother would arrive occasionally on a high holiday. They became the first generation of assimilated American Jews. Now along come my brother and I. My brother is younger, and they decided it would be a good idea to have him bar mitzvahed. So they go to the Park Avenue Synagogue in New York, where Milton Steinberg was the rabbi at the time, and they begin to teach him Hebrew. They don't want to teach me Hebrew. What does a girl need Hebrew for? And I'm extremely angry. But I'm still attending this history class, which meets on what they then called a Sunday school on Sunday mornings at the synagogue. And I raise my hand and I answer the questions, because I'm that kind of person. And the teacher at the Hebrew school, at the Sunday school, says to me, "Please be quiet. We need to hear from the bar mitzvah boys." All right, I say, that's it for you folks. Then I'm 12 years old. And my father was a rather cold and difficult and not such a kind human being. And my best friend's father, who was also Jewish, was an orthopedist who gave his time for free in the black section in Harlem, and he worked many, many hours, and he was a very kind, good, serving man. And when we were 12, my friend's father died. And I thought, how is this possible? What kind of a God would do this? Why is my mean father walking around making my mother miserable? And why is this wonderful, sweet man dead? Now, everybody in this room must have an experience of the same sort. Why is God not good? Why is, all the things that as grown-ups we know. That was the beginning of my experience. And no one said to me at the time, come and stay in the synagogue, come to Rosh Hashanah, come to Yom Kippur, come on Sukkot. We'll talk about what you believe later. I thought you had to believe or you had to leave. I thought it was an absolute, that the things that were said in the text needed to be believed by me or I should go away. I went away. Meantime, my brother believed more and more and more. My brother became extremely religious and decided that he was going to grow up to be a rabbi. Now, you understand that my father wore a camel's hair coat, and he had a monogrammed attaché case, and he was a terrific tennis player. My brother developed a stoop. My brother developed payas. He grew payas. He wouldn't eat in the house because the house was not kosher. My mother would give him money to go to a kosher delicatessen several miles away. She refused to go down the elevator with him. My father refused to go down the elevator with him. I used to only bring friends home when I was sure that he was in his yeshiva and would not be apparent to anybody. He kept this up for years and years. And in those years, he learned fluent Hebrew. He learned fluent Yiddish. He learned Arabic because he was a linguistic kind of person. And he learned the tradition of Torah and Talmud. There was nothing he didn't know. There were certain problems. That is to say, he couldn't pass me in the hall because he didn't want to touch me. We had, we had certain difficulties that made our relationship impossible. But at the same time, I was learning nothing about being Jewish. I was learning nothing about Jewish tradition, nothing about Jewish civilization. And he was learning more and more and more. And that's, what can we do? The world isn't always fair. He then went on to college, and he lost his faith in a direct kind of way, and he became a doctor, and he became a hematologist. He became a hematologist with a Yiddish accent. And no one in my family could understand why would my brother have a Yiddish accent, and no one understood why he was extremely pale and stooped. And he told the best Jewish jokes in the world, as if he had spent every summer of his life in the Catskills, which he had not. And the thickness of the culture, it's Yiddishkeit. its real learning, its real scholarship stayed with him on into his adult life. Now, I don't know how many of you know, Martin began to refer to it. The matter rested there until, I guess it was 1979, 1978, 1979. I wrote a piece on having a Christmas tree in my Jewish home. I'm worrying about it. I'm worrying, why is it that I have this Christmas tree, and every time we go out to get the Christmas tree, the rabbi across the street is standing on his steps, and I feel awful. And why should I feel awful, and what does this mean? And what is going on with this Christmas tree? I begin an exploration of this, and I begin to talk to people, and I begin to find out what I had been missing. And what I had been missing was enormous. It was my own culture, my own civilization, my own past. I became a Jewish writer. I consider myself a Jewish writer. I must have been a Jewish writer before I was writing about Jewish issues, but since I didn't know it, it didn't mean a great deal. Now I know it. I am truly a Jewish writer, and I have gone on to be concerned about Jewish politics. There are certainly some people who wish I had never discovered it, but I had. Now, that would be the end of the story, but there's a last chapter that I have to tell you about, which is that my hematologist brother's work was about sickle cell anemia. His research, he was a research scientist, and he did research on sickle cell anemia. And in 1982, he cut himself in his lab, and he developed AIDS, and he became very, very ill. And he became very, very angry. And in the course of his anger, one of the things he became particularly angry about was the Jewish religion. What he became really angry at was God. And it will be hard for me to convince you how passionately he must have believed in God while not believing in God, to have been that angry at God whom he didn't believe in. But when he died, which was now, it will be 2 years ago next month, he left his wife and me instructions. And the instructions were there was to be no Hebrew at his funeral. There was to be no funeral. There was to be himself, his son, his wife, and me, and my husband, and we were to go up to the cemetery, and we were to put the body in the ground, and we could stand there for a minute if we insisted, absolutely silently, and then we could leave. And there was to be no shiva, and there was to be nobody back at the house, and there was to be nothing but silence, because, as he said, a God who does this deserves nothing but silence. We were tempted, my sister-in-law and I. We considered whether to invite a few more people. We considered what we might say. We ended up honoring his wishes. So there we are, and it happened to be raining. And there we are, out in the rain, absolutely silently, and the sky is above us. And I realized absolutely at that moment that silence is not the answer, that we need our rituals, we need our passages, we need our traditions, we need to know we need to build our bridges towards God, away from God, towards each other, away from each other. We can't just stand there in the rain quietly. It simply is impossible. That is very much on my mind now as a Jewish writer. I am thinking of how can I explain the urgency to the next generation. They can't walk away. They can't end up with silence. They can't end up with nothing. They have to have the richness and the knowledge of their tradition. Now I want to go back to land, people, and Torah. I want to say again, the story that I just told you, which is not the entire story of my life, there are lots of parts left out, is about how American Jewish history flowed through one woman. So as you think about it, you know, it belongs among all the other stories. It's not the story, it's one story. However, now I want to tell you about one other experience I had while I was searching my Jewish roots out. Every Jewish family and person I talked to told me that they were descended from the great rabbi of... Everybody had a at least a great-great-grandfather who was a fine Talmudic scholar. I was the only Jew in America who had descended from tailors. So imagine my relief when Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, who is also a historian, wrote a book called Jews in America, and explained that, well, after all, practically every one of us here were descended from tailors, and that the reason our folks came here is because they weren't such fine intellects in the yeshiva academies. Those intellects and those very fine, highly regarded religious folks stayed there. It was the no-good son that came here. So, my point is that in our ordinariness as a Jewish community, in our not being perhaps the most distinguished of all Jews, we have still made a rather remarkable community. And I think that all the reasons why we sometimes feel superior, whether they are defensive, whether they are earned or they are wished for, whatever they are, to some extent, history tells us, you know, we did okay. We really all did okay. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the other thing that Arthur Hertzberg explained to me. He explained to me one day as I was talking about what kind of a Jew I was, oh, he said, you're a historical mysticist. I am not a mysticist, I said, because I consider myself a rational person. Historical mysticism is the creed that he gave me. Now, what prompted him to insult me like that? I had said that I believed that the Jewish people has a purpose, that I believe Jewish history has a purpose, that I believe that we are meant in some way to do something in this world as a people, and that our past, our present, and our future are part of some meaningful direction. We are doing something. We are being something. We are part of history in a significant and meaningful way, for good, not for bad. Now, when I examine that statement carefully, I know it doesn't hold an awful lot of water. I know that's not a very rational thing to say. I know that that borders on making an idol out of history. I know that that can be perverted into historic messianism, in which case I think I have the right to all the land because it was always meant to be mine, and I can go do anything I want to anybody else because history says I should. I don't mean it like that. I mean it in a sense of a moral purpose, and I mean it much more vaguely than the messianic historians mean it. I just have a feeling there's a purpose. And if I didn't believe that, I don't know what I would be doing. I don't know how to answer my brother's silence. I don't know how to deal with the feelings that we have of connection to our people, interest in the future, anger at God for what he has done to us, awe for what he has given us. The whole roll of feelings that are part of a human being's experience in this world, which are stated in particular Jewish terms. One needs to put a shape to it. So my answer to the Hadassah Commission was, we need to be sure there are Jews in the next generation because we have meaning. It means something to us. I can't explain exactly what, but I know it has meaning. If we don't emphasize and search and grope towards that meaning, we will end up, I think, just drowning ourselves in words. We will end up forgetting the why of what we're doing. And what I would like my contribution to be to this colloquium is to simply ask that we never forget the why. We never forget, we're not just engaged in social busy work. We're not just spinning our wheels. There is a great purpose about our existence, and while we don't have to talk about it a lot, we do have to remember it. Thank you very much.